All right, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody to our webinar on T&E, the how, the why, and the ROI. We appreciate you joining us and hoping everybody can hear me now. But thank you so much for joining us. We're excited about the topic. So here's the agenda that we plan to follow today. And by the way, my name is Rachel Collins. I am the principal research lead for the financial management practice at APQC. So briefly, I'll go through a little bit of welcome, introductions to our guest speaker today, and give you a little bit of study background and context for the research that we did. And then I am joined today by our guest presenter, Ernie Humphrey, and he's going to walk through the study highlights and key findings. And then, as we typically do, we have allocated some time at the end of today's session for Q&A. So do feel free to submit those questions in the Q&A box through Zoom, and we will hopefully have time to address those at the end of the session. We also put some related resources as well as our contact information for you at the end of the deck. We did a survey for this project, and so we have a link to the full survey report on our resources library if you're interested in seeing that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let me give you a little bit of background and context first in terms of why we undertook this study. A number of different reasons, but I think number one, there's a gap in corporate business travel research, not a lot of information out there with regards to understanding what is the return on investment of T&E spend. And this is really a fascinating question, I think, especially now that we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic. Folks are returning to business travel. They've certainly returned to personal travel. And in the business world, we've been doing, and in our personal world as well, we've been doing a lot of things virtually now for over a year. And in many cases, it's worked out fairly well. So this may cause some organizations, at least, to question more closely the need for business travel in the future. And we wanted to at least get a qualitative sense in terms of what is the ROI for different kinds of T&E. And so we asked some of those types of questions in the study to better understand what the respondents believe or perceive to be the ROI of T&E. Also, certainly the nature of T&E spend has been evolving. Naturally, with everything that's been going on, T&E spend has greatly decreased over the last year, and now it's starting to pick back up. But what did it look like? What did the respondents say it looked like over the last year? And which T&E categories decreased? Which T&E categories increased? And how did their policies or their practices around T&E change related to spend and categories and so on? Also, there's a need to benchmark how companies are leveraging technology to manage their spend, to reduce fraud, and to process their reports. Certainly, there's many available and affordable technologies out there today that can help organizations be more efficient and effective in their T&E expense report processing, but also really enhance the employee experience with T&E processes, including obviously things like automation, but mobile, leveraging artificial intelligence for fraud, and that kind of thing. So we wanted to explore what do practices related to T&E automation look like, at least for this participant pool. And then finally, a number of questions still remain about what T&E management looks like in the next normal, and how are organizations evolving their T&E practices as we hopefully move out of COVID in a time such as this. So these are some of the types of questions that we explored in the study and more. So a little bit more about the study, just to give you a sense in terms of setup about the demographics. We had 233 participants in the survey across industries and across organizational sizes. The respondents, by the way, were predominantly T&E process owners or individuals involved in the T&E processes in finance or T&E at their organizations. And then in terms of organizational size, we saw that about 45% of respondents reported over $1 billion in annual revenues, 65% reported more than 1,000 employees, And in terms of region, 65% were in the US and Canada, and the remainder were spread out across other geographies around the world. Then just wanted to give you a sense in terms of some of the top industries represented in the study, and you can see that it's a cross-industry study, again, cross-region study, but the top participants in terms of industry were financial services and banking, followed by services and industrial products. So with that background and context, I wanted to formally introduce our guest speaker and subject matter expert for our study today. And we have partnered with Ernie on another study last year and many other engagements. So we're thrilled to be working with him again. Ernie Humphrey currently serves as the CEO of Treasury Webinars and 360 Thought Leadership Consulting. And he's also the VP Client Engagement for the US practice at the Treasury Recruitment Company. He has extensive experience as a longtime Treasury manager. He previously served as the Director of Treasury Services at the AFP. Ernie has a bachelor's and a master's in economics, both from Purdue University, and he currently serves on the board of directors of the Purdue Alumni Association. He's also authored published articles on working capital, performance management, budgeting and planning, acquisition integration, and bank relationship management, in addition to articles dealing with several aspects of professional development. In fact, he wrote an ebook that was recognized as one of the top 10 ebooks for CFOs in 2018 and was named one of the top 20 pioneer CEOs by Tech Magazine in 2020. Ernie is a certified Treasury professional, and he's a sought-after public speaker. So with that, I will hand the floor over to Ernie to talk about our study highlights and results.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us for the webinar today. I hope you all enjoyed the little bio that my mom wrote for me. So my mom has a big smile on her face right now. So as Rachel mentioned, I mean, this is a topic that is really important to CFOs. And so that's really where my space is, CFOs and Treasury. And so a little more context, I've been involved in T&E expense management research and why it matters to the CFO for probably 6 or 7 years. And then I took a little bit of a break. So it's been probably before COVID hit, maybe a year where I hadn't really been done much research there. And there's always been a gap in my mind about how to look at the ROI. And then once COVID hit, it really got me thinking that, wow, are we really going to return, to the levels of T&E expense management? So now it's more important than ever, right? As companies are going to be expected to make that business case. And it might not necessarily be that we want less T&E spend. It may just be that we want more, or we want to allocate that T&E spend. And one of the things that Rachel and APQC was great about is I have a little bit of a different take on survey questions. And so we collaborated very closely. And so you'll see, if you took the survey, I think you'll notice there were questions you've never been asked or asked in a certain way, because a lot of surveys tell you what happened. To me, I want to know why. And so we want to get to the why. The why lets us have implications and allows you to benchmark. And so let's go ahead and let's start off with the ROI. So one of the things we just wanted to take a look at was, are companies even attempting to measure this, right? Quantitatively, the ROI for the T&E spend. And so we had 43% of the companies say that they do. And then another 39% said they don't do it quantitatively, but qualitatively. And so that is at least a good start. But I think we have data out there, right? I think we just need to change our thinking a little bit. And so part of it depends on how you budget your T&E spend. And so when I was back in Treasury, we used to just roll it up by a percentage. That's a no-no. But you want to make sure that you understand what that spend is. And as a CFO, I think you're probably challenging when you go to that budgeting process this year. If you're CFO, I think you're going to challenge your folks. If you're the sales guy, right, I think you're going to have to justify your spend. And the good news is what we'll show you is that the spend is usually off the charts. And so for some companies, it's just going to be a little bit of a different mindset. And just a little context, I think the reason that we had 43% was, as Rachel said, the tilt of the company size, was pretty big, right? So I think that pretty much aligns almost exactly with the enterprise size companies, right? I think it was 45%. So I would imagine there's a high correlation there. That being said, companies of all sizes, I believe I know you can do it, and should you be doing it? Absolutely, yes. And so I think, again, expectations should be that we can measure the ROI, and organizations like APQC are doing a great service in helping us measure what that is and give you resources, right? And so you need to benchmark it, right? First of all, what's your ROI, right? How does that compare to those within your industry? So when you use benchmarks, you have to look at yourself versus maybe benchmarks to your industry, but also benchmarks over time. And then maybe some organization, maybe APQC, will really own that, right? And then you'll be able to say, okay, I'm in line with the benchmark. And maybe just because your ROI has gone up or down, that's not the point. Is maybe the average ROI for T&E spend for travel is 6 times, right? Is 600%, and yours is 10%. Well, you've got some work to do. So again, just kind of food for thought there. And I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that number would be lower on the quantitative side for us and what we're looking at. And then this one actually did surprise me a little bit. We'll start on the right. We asked folks if there's a business requirement for T&E above a certain level, and 65% said yes. And so those of you on the call, I'd be interested, to know from you, right? If you have the same requirement. Again, I think company size has something to do with that. The other side of that is you better be ready, right? Especially if you're at a company with over 1,000 employees, right? Or that enterprise the other price revenue category, you got to be ready, right, for that business case. So you need to, and there's, I'm sure if you call up APQC, they'll be happy to help you out with that. And then categories for which companies are tracking ROI, interesting thing there. And some of these, let's remember the survey was taken this year. So I think some of these are due to categories from this year. And some of these are actually new, kind of new categories. I think LinkedIn subscriptions and social media. If companies were tracking this before COVID, I give you the big clap, but it's interesting to see. So for me, for most companies, you will be spending in these categories. And so hopefully you're tracking your main categories. And if you're not, you really should be. And so you may have more categories in this, you may have less. Where you stand depends on where you sit, but it's just interesting to see, right? Conferences, trade shows, right? And that's even a little bit different, right? And so now you may be going to virtual conferences. So hopefully that cost is less. Actually, it should be free, but that's my conferences. But customer meetings, right? I actually thought that would be higher. I would have thought everyone is always doing this, right? Customer meetings. And also you could say, well, it's not really customer prospects. So maybe there's a division there that we might want to look at next year. College tuition, I'd be interested to know how they're measuring that. So next year we might dive in there. Incentives, LinkedIn. So these are just interesting to see. I know if you'd like a copy of the slides, Rachel and her team be happy to do that. But again, as they mentioned in the beginning, APQC does a fantastic job of offering you a plethora of resources. I partnered with them on a treasury benchmarking survey, and their resource center is fantastic, off the charts. And so they've got a lot of good content in there. That there's actually a story or case study with people that took the survey. And I believe they also might be working on some publications related to the study. And so this, what you're getting here is a preview, and a lot of things on here are newsworthy. So these may even hit the mainstream. We might see a Rachel on TV, but I can only dream, can I? All right, and so let's look at the estimated ROI. So again, where you stand depends on where you sit. You have to take a little context, but it's just interesting to see, right? So what's the per dollar spent? What's the ROI, right? The ROI. So we have less than $1, $1 to $5, $5 to $7. So look at these things, right? These are 100 to 500%, 700%. This is more than my math. Rachel might have to correct me. Whatever, 1,000% ROI. Wouldn't you like to spend more money in there, right? You have to be careful, but you have to make sure you're measuring that right. But incentives, right? More than $10, 23% for customer meetings. So that's good, right? That you're seeing that investment. So hopefully you're tying that, right, to more business, maybe extensions, maybe those deeper relationships. All the CFO studies that I've been involved with, which is too many to count, is what they say is one of the drivers of growth is deepening our customer relationships. And it's even more important today when you're in the subscription economy, because you have to earn those relationships on a monthly basis. So just interesting, right? Across the board, right? less than 100%, right? None of these, right? It's only 7% for social media. And so as we look out here, you know, I would have going in, you know, I would have thought, you know what? I think this is going to show that we shouldn't be spending so much money on T&E, because all the research and all the webinars you see say mitigate spend, mitigate spend, mitigate spend. Well, this one says we need to spend more, right? And so I think that's going to be exciting. You know, for some of my sales pros out there, you share this result with your sales team, right? They're going to say, hey, look, you're always, the CFO is busting my chops, right? About the spend. So this slide is incredibly compelling. I'll probably say that on every slide, but I love this. And so let's switch gears a little bit. And one of the things that we also wanted to look at was, okay, we knew there were changes, right, due to COVID for T&E spend, and maybe some management. So on the, you know, in theory, we're like, you know, people must have been tracking different things. They must have been spending less or more in different categories. But wouldn't it be interesting to know what those changes are? And then for you to see, oh, you know, if you're not aware, that's your homework, go find out, hey, what about our categories, right? What have we done? Do we, and then also as we get a little bit later, what about our policies? Do we need to change our policies? The answer is you do, you know, especially for health concerns. But this T&E, as I'm getting excited, T&E is really fascinating, believe it or not. And so this right here is kind of a noteworthy thing, right? Anticipated budget and travel, especially if you look at the amount of business travel. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but T&E has historically been the second largest operating category or operating expense for companies of all sizes. And so that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And at some companies, it's millions of dollars. And so just some good data, right? For even the travel industry, right? When do you expect your business travelers, your budget will go back, right, to the same? And then we had next year, right, 34%. And so 26%, you know, this year. I think that number might be lower. I'm sad to say we're seeing some outbreaks there. But if you look at these numbers, right, then we'll never be the same, longer than 3 years to the next 3 years. And so that's 27%. And I would guess if we took this number again, this later this year number, some of that would shift up here and up here. And so you'll start to see that, you know, companies they might just be reducing those budgets. But what about the other slide? We should say, no, wait a minute. Why? You know, I get it. If the pandemic's in place, if the health conditions don't allow that, that's fine. That should be in your policy and your forecast. But let's just not automatically reduce spend. Now, as Rachel said, some companies have found that they haven't seen activities go down. Interesting, you know. Okay, so let's understand that, right? Certain types of meetings we might be reduced, but those face-to-face customer meetings, right? So let's figure out what we can do remotely, right? And what we can allocate even more money to that's going to be more valuable. And this is something that I was glad that we included, was not only do you want people to travel, are they going to be comfortable traveling, right? You don't want to force your people to travel, right? That some people won't. I mean, that, you know, and I understand the concerns there. And so what we saw, most people, I was a little surprised. We had 34%, right? 6 to 12 or more. I thought that number would be a little bit higher. Again, depends on the survey respondents and how well they know their travelers. But, you know, this is something that you need to be thinking about, right? If you're going to expect people to travel, this is going to go in your policy. You have to have resources available. So in real time, you can let people know, right? What are the conditions there? Do you follow the CDC? Do you follow the states? Do you follow the local governments? Do you want to tell people they need to get vaccinated to go on business travel? What kind of legal issues? And so again, this is newsworthy stuff. So just to me, just very fascinating. Here, more context in the survey report about the numbers behind here, maybe some slicing and dicing. Rachel and her team love to do slicing and dicing. So if you want to dig in a little bit on the demographics and those impacts, I'm sure her and her team be happy to do that for you. And then changes in T&E over the past year, biggest increases. Not really. There were a few things that were surprising and a few things that weren't. This was really surprising to me a little bit because I do virtual events and webinars, right? So I was glad to see that this was increasing and increasing dramatically. Here's the thing. Webinars shouldn't be expensive. So, if you're paying hundreds of dollars for webinars, you need to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I guarantee I can get you the same content and your CPE or CTP credits without spending for that. Really glad to see collaborative software subscriptions, and then cell phones. That makes sense. Office supplies, yeah, that makes sense. It's just more of maybe we had to buy more computers, and then incentives as well. I think some of the other things that we may have seen would be, I guess it might come in here like LinkedIn and things like that. Maybe Sales Navigator, maybe upgrading Zoom. Maybe some folks had to upgrade their computers. So just interesting to see, okay, these things, and then take a look in the mirror with your team if you don't know, and say, oh, okay, what changed, right? And then why? Does that make sense? Will that go down this year? Should it stay the same? Ancillary topic. Should we let people work from home? Should we be more flexible? The answer for me is yes. But again, that's your company and your culture. This is another question that really came top of mind. Have your company needed to revise the T&E policy, right, to make you more comfortable? And then we gave them a bunch of choices, right, of what we thought might be changing based on our experience. Again, APQC has a lot of experience. I have probably about 7-8 years of T&E research, being really close to some of the big T&E providers. And so booking rules, right, 49%, right? And so there was a trend where companies were using specific rules. It had to get approved. You had to get the lowest price, and you couldn't make revisions. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now with COVID and restrictions and travel, I think you need to be more flexible. This number I thought would be higher. Health, safety, and wellness procedures, new cleanliness, safety, government policies, right? There's certain, again, compliance, right? Where's your company located? You have to make sure you're on top of those regulations. And this is just more processing, right? Digital signature, capture of receipts, since some people were completely remote. And so these would just be things that I would checklist. Okay, do you have a T&E policy? I hope you do. If you don't, I think you need one. That there's templates out there. We could do a whole webinar on best practices of T&E policy. But if you do, you should just sit down with your team. And if you haven't revised your policy yet for COVID, you should have a meeting. When I used to work in corporate, we had a T&E, like a travel committee. And so that would be something that you'd want to have your travel committee, but also your travelers, right? Who are your people that travel most? Maybe it's your sales team. Maybe some of your other folks, development team, go out, maybe your customer success, get them all in the room. Ask them, okay, what are things that we might need to change? Are you comfortable traveling? And so let's make this flexible, but also enforceable as well. So you want to be looking at the impact of your T&E policy, and then your why and your why not, and that will drive things as well. And then we'll look at decreases, right? We look at the other side of it, not extremely exciting, but just, kind of a check, right? A check, that we've got some people that are paying attention to the questions, and our hunches are backed by data. Wouldn't that be nice? Data-driven decision-making. So obviously mileage, parking, tolls, again, that depends on your business. Customer meetings, right? So look, customer meetings, they went way down, right? And when we looked at the ROI, now they need to go way up, right? But then the other side of it is, do we need customer meetings, right? So I think that's where the balance comes, right? You have a meeting, okay. So how do you decide? First of all, do you need the meeting or not, right? The travel for the meeting, or do you need the meeting at all? How often do you need to have meetings to align on expectations? I thought this would be higher. I thought this would be 80-90%, right? Because there's not a lot of live conferences or trade shows in the last year. I honestly don't know of any of significance. Maybe, and maybe some down in Florida that I saw, and we saw some creeping out here. I think we'll see them more later in the summer, but definitely through the spring, which is when most of them used to be. We aren't seeing those. And then of course gas, lift, and then meals and groceries. I would like this to have actually to go up just for what I've seen. Engagement tools. When I worked at a company for about 10 months last year, in addition to my other jobs, and they'd send us like a virtual card so we could have lunch for free, right? And that would be a meal expense, so we could all be engaged and have lunch together and dinner together. So that was cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at new categories added, which is interesting. This number surprised me a little bit. Have you started tracking new categories? Right? It was only 32%. Yes. I thought that might be a little bigger given, a lot of companies had to go to a totally remote environment, and maybe they already had people working remotely. If you went from an environment where you had nobody working remotely to like almost your whole team, yeah, I bet you had a lot. And then this is a really cool tool. It's just like a word cloud. So we had open text. And so categories we had, there's subscriptions. These are just words, not categories. Broadband, phone, long distance. So sanitizers. So just some interesting ink for printers. And so this is just interesting to maybe take a look at when you get the slides, but also, just as a check, this might be something you want to ask, right? Your T&E team. This is something your travel committee might want to do. And so the good news is you have the CFO's attention if you're not the CFO on spend, right? So let's take advantage of that. So now we're looking at, okay, what's the ROI of spend? Are we tracking the right categories? All right, we're trying to get ourselves to make informed decisions. Are we tracking the right things? Are we tracking the right categories, right? What depth of information do we need? And then here's, give us a little more baseline on what your company's currently track. These are pretty consistent. I will note that things that have changed from when I started, we didn't used to see things like Uber and Lyft. We didn't see collaborative software subscriptions. And then there's other like meals and grocery. I don't know if we saw those so much. So what we've seen in our other research is Uber and Lyft is way more prevalent than car rentals. But just again, here's another thing for you to check. Are you tracking all these categories, right? How much does it mean to your company, right? What are your policies in each category? So you have to have policies. A lot of companies, I suggest you have these category spend limits, right? And they have to be a little flexible. So let's make sure maybe we have these. Well, but what about the other ones that people are tracking? So make sure that we've got all of our bases covered there. And here we go. I mentioned this early. How do you set your category minimums? We have annual budgeting process. Okay, that's okay. As long as your budgeting process isn't just rolling something up by 5 or 10%, if it's actually a process where people are justifying that. So some of these, what I would say, select all that apply. I would actually, besides no limits, I would use a combination of all of these, right? You want to have it in your process where people have to justify their spend. You want to look at your spending trends somewhat, right? See if you're going the right directions, right? Depending on what the category is. Okay, what is a GSA per diem, right? Make it feel fair, make your travelers feel it's fair. Industry benchmarks, this data is available. And then of course in travelers destination. Yeah, I think that's important, right? I live in Indiana. If I'm traveling to Indiana, right? Or versus if I'm going to New York City, downtown Manhattan, it's going to cost more. To go to New York City, it's going to cost more to stay in the hotel. So again, you want to have your maximums, but you need to be cognizant, of the dimensions of that as well. And so again, just trying to give you on this part the framework, right? How to take a look at your effectiveness in your T&E expense management, right? How do we manage that? What does that look like? How do we do that effectively? So now we'll shift gears a little bit, take a look at the what and the how. So let's start to look at what I call the efficiency on the processing cycle time. And so one of the things that's gotten more attention in the T&E space is really how do we mitigate the cost? How do we understand the cost to process an expense report? And you need to make sure that you look at there's a lot of systems and people involved in the reimbursement cycle. So you want to make sure that you're considering all of those. If you're not estimating the cost to process an expense report, that's an important thing that I strongly suggest that you look at. And so there's some detailed information here from my friends at APQC. And so again, this would be a deeper dive. I can't explain. There's a lot of data here on this webinar, but again, this would be something you'd want to take a look at. maybe on your own. If you want to call me and I'll walk you through this, I'm happy to do that. But you start to look at, okay, expense reports. How does does the efficiency, how does that correlate, right? With large or small respondents? What are you thinking right now? You should. Okay, what kind of technology do they use? What kind of process do they use? Are they centralized, decentralized? Absolutely. And then some cycle times, right? The reason this is important is that there are many bottlenecks in the process. And so you want to make sure the time that it's taking someone to do something is mitigated. So especially on the submit a report, right? That's your person that submits it. The reviewer, who are you asking to review it? Is that manual? Is it going to be audited? How long is it going to take to get to your payments approved? How long is it going to take your traveler to get reimbursed? And so all of these things are things you need to be thinking about, right? And so these are things, again, depending on your company, depending on your industry, but these are things that help us make informed decisions and help us get into the right time frame, because there's tremendous cost savings to mitigating the T&E expense reporting gone wrong can be a huge cost. A lot of that cost is a productivity drag. If you start to look at how much time your sales team, if you have, especially if you have international travel force, how much time do they spend trying to put the reports together? How much time do they spend on the phone, maybe with their manager, with the person processing the report? The bottom, ask your travelers, are you frustrated by doing your expense reports? Then you have to say why. In today's world, it's not necessary. I hear technology aversion. All you have to do is get a little set of your travelers on these automated systems, then everybody will be begging for it. Guess what the easiest thing is? You want to get paid faster? Yes. Okay, let's go. Right. Again, we talked about this. Tracking a cost to process an expense report, 44%. That's a no-no. We want to have more people doing that, especially with the company sizes that we have. Again, expense report, there's a lot of maybe calculators out there, but you need to really dig in here. So here's what you want to look at. You want to look at where are you at right now, right? Do it, make sure you're considering all the costs. I can help you to some resources on that and say, okay, so maybe you're more than $20 right now, right? So it might not be that you're going to get to less than 5, but what can we do to get to, let's say we go 20 to 10. That's $10 an expense report. We process 50,000 expense reports, 100,000 expense reports. Wow, where does that number go? Bottom line, right? And so that's a cost savings, right? That's just like a gift. Here you go, Merry Christmas. And so those numbers can be big. And so it's about looking at where are you now? Where can you be? And then what's the cost of getting there? And a lot of times that business case really makes itself. And so again, you might be able to get to 5, but the journey might be, okay, how do we get from 20 to 10, right? And then 10 to 5, but those numbers are meaningful. Now, some folks don't have a big volume in certain industries of reports, but the difference can be, it can cost people $200 or $300 to do an expense report. That's true. What if you get that down to $30? Well, that's $270. So the math, it makes sense there. But again, it's a lot more than that, right? It's also about the productivity side of things as well. And another part of that productivity, time spent on the phone, right? Your people calling people on the phone doesn't make sense. You got the wrong geocode. All those things, if you haven't been in the weeds, those can be tremendously surprising numbers. And so, sorry, cycle time, again, how long does it to reimburse a traveler? Oh, if it was more than a month and I was in Treasury, man, I would be hiding under my desk. So I used to work in Treasury. Every sales meeting they had, I knew they were coming up here, right? In today's world, I have to say, once they get that report, and I'll caveat this: if there's no errors in it, to me, there's no reason for it to take more than a couple weeks, right? Most times people will do a pay run every week. Maybe you want to do it at the same time as your payroll, 2 a week. Okay, maybe that's your monthly cycle. One of the things, which is defense for the company, is they want to be able to estimate, right, what that spend's going to be as part of their cash forecasting. But again, just something to take a look at. And then how do you reimburse employees? Check. It's so costly to do that. In my mind, just moving from check to ACH of all your people and expense reports, that is a huge savings. Back in the day, it was 10 times more costly. I think it's probably still at least 5 times more costly to do a check than to do a direct deposit. There's a lot of cost to a check. So that's another way, right? Effective T&E expense management makes sense. How are you paying your employees, right? If they're already on direct deposit, why not put your expense reimbursement process in there? These solutions used to be cost prohibitive. Now everyone has access to the best in class technology, and the savings can be huge. And if you look at the ROI that companies see from investing in this technology, it's usually less than a year from all the survey data that I've seen. Of course, there's exception. So let's pivot again. I'm dancing around. Rachel's excited. I'm dancing again. All right, controlling T&E spend. So how do we control the spend? I think we touched on this. Let's dig in just a little bit. Does your company have a formal T&E policy? All right, they clap 85%. That's awesome, but it really doesn't mean anything if it's not enforced. It's not enforced. It's not enforceable. Do you know if people are following it? Is it a piece of paper? Do people understand it? What's the IQ for your employees of your T&E policy? How often do you review it with them? You should definitely be reviewing your T&E policy with everyone once you get back into the office, because people are going to have questions. I would, right? If I'm traveling, I'm like, hey, do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to, how do I book? Did this change? What changed? How can you make me feel comfortable? You should have that meeting with everyone that travels. You should actually have that conversation with everyone at your company, in my opinion. So we asked folks, how do you enforce your T&E policy? Manually checks an approver. That's asking an awful lot, right? You're asking every manager to approve each expense and understand the category limits in each category. This isn't an audit. You're expecting this manager to have accountability for that. Now, can they do it? Probably. Depending on, what about your VP of sales? Do you want him doing this line by line? T&E automatically flags out of policy expenses for review. Thank you. That's where we want to go, right? Self-enforcement, employee integrity. You know what? You love your employees to death. Every T&E webinar I've been on, everyone in the T&E business says there's an opportunity for fraud, people are going to do it. So this would be my big no-no. Not enforced, then why do you have your policy? So the technology is there. You can do audits, and there's AI that does audits, but expecting your approvers, how much time does that waste to your managers, VP of sales, right? Treasurer, anyone that has an employee? Do we want to sit there and look at the expenses? Are we going to freaking pay it? Oops, sorry, I must write a curse word. Rachel's going to cut me off. But do you want to expect your person to know these things, all of them, right? And I've seen automatically flag. Now you can do a soft stop and a hard stop, right? If it's out of policy, you can just send a warning to their manager, right? Or you can stop it until they fix something. So you can program your T&E policy quite a bit into the technology that's available. And so these are questions that I love as well. Ask yourself these questions about understanding. Employee understandings policy. Strongly agree is only 40%. They get a clap, clap. Somewhat agree. I'd say most of the people should be here. Agree or disagree, but I guarantee you should give your travelers a little quiz about them, and then make an incentive. Whoever gets more than 20% gets a $10 Starbucks card, right? So, make sure that they know that, right? Especially your managers, if they are doing, approvers of anything, manager, director, whatever that might be. So employee education is a low cost way to enforce. Use that with technology. And then people need to know that you're watching the expenses, and then they need to know what the consequences are. You can do things like post compliance by department, managers, post by person. So you can use those types of negative consequences as well. Frequency of review with travelers. Again, to me, managers are responsible for doing it as needed. I would rather have a set policy on that. So when I was back in corporate treasury, we only reviewed that when I got hired. And so when I got hired, I didn't even travel, but it was never like reviewed with me again. That was a long time ago, but this is where I was at. And so for me, it would be yearly, but it could be more than yearly, right? Especially with COVID. And so again, you're putting an awful big load on your managers with all the other things that they have to do. And especially with the technology available to us and to help them get more value out of their time. Again, we want them focusing on high value add activities. And so, you know, even if you can have the policy, right? But what if the policy is inefficient? It's not even stopping the expenses, it's wasting time. And so all these things are considerations. Some of you didn't know T&E expense management was so complicated. I guarantee I didn't when I started looking in here. And so here's another area of mine, which I'm glad they included here. So for me, I always see webinars and thought leadership about, we have AP over here and we have T&E spend over here. So to me, my perspective is T&E is like internal accounts payable and AP is like outgoing. So that's spend management. And so I wanted to ask the extent to which you're managing them in silos, right? 23% strongly agree, 32% someone agree. So over half of the companies, again, we had a lot of enterprise sized companies are managing those in silos. Why? Think about it. Don't we want to treat our suppliers like our employees, and our employees as well as our suppliers? The natural synergies there, you know, between, they're not exactly the same, but why are we managing those in silos? How are we enforcing policies, right? How are we leveraging technology? How are we setting category limits? How are we assigning GL codes? How are we doing approvals? All those things, they translate across. Let's harmonize best practices across T&E and AP and silos. It's not saying you have to do it, but it's just something to think about, right? What about T&E? What's the percentage of compliance with policies? So we look at 76% to 100%. We can't even get 50% of the companies to say, you know, that, you know, so, or below, high as 75%. So over 50% of the companies can't even say that 25% of their things are out of policy. Why do you have your policy? How much money is that, right? It's not to say that it shouldn't have been spent. Are you making a conscious decision to spend out of policy? Do you need to tighten up, right? To me, you need to tighten up your policy. If you're that far out of compliance with 25% of your expenses, you should be tightening up your policy. Now, am I a T&E expert? Have I done a T&E for $1 billion, $5 billion? No, but I've talked to a lot of people that have. And so I have a CFO hat on, right? So I'm in an auditor hat that I used to get bothered all the time. I'm trying to control expenses, right? My policy compliance, you know, that's a big number. That's a big number. What if my T&E number's $50 million? 20% is out of compliance. Where's that $1 million? I think that's right. Where's that at? Did I need to spend that? Was that fraud? Was that wasted? What can I do with $1 million? What can I do? You know, those are things to kind of get your mind in the right mindset. And then on what's your limit? So this can be interesting to give us some insight. So maybe your compliance isn't what it should be. What are things you can do, right? So you need quite a bit of flexibility. That's okay. So just make sure that you're going back and auditing those. Okay, the soft limit. Okay, was that justified? And then if it is justified, then move that, you know, into a category. So to me, that means compliance. To me, that's compliant, right? At least if we checked it and it was justified, right, without checking it at all. So every out of policy thing in my mind should be checked as to why, and then you should have a category for that, and that's where you should hold people accountable. Don't have the time to check at the policies filed, that number should be higher, but travelers don't understand policy, accountability. So all these things are going to help you identify ways in which that you can improve compliance, right? You need to make it easy. You need to educate. You need to educate the policy. And so you need to have accountability. Again, they don't know the policy exists. That's, again, education. Don't care. There's no consequences. So there has to be accountability for the people that travel and the managers as well. and at the department level as well, there needs to be consequences if you're not following the compliance. And then one of the things that these are some correlations that APQC has done to take a look at, okay, what are the things that are driving best practices? Rachel, you want to go ahead and lead us through this slide?
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. So we did some statistical analysis on some of the questions. And just as you said, we did some statistical analysis on the practices against some of those results or outcome type measures that you talked about earlier in terms of the cost and the cycle time and that kind of thing. And we found that the respondents which have that higher level of integration between their accounts payable and between their travel and expense also reported or were significantly more likely to also report a lower cost to process an expense report, as well as a faster time to reimburse their employees. So that was one of the analyses that we did. If I can move this to the next one. Thank you. And so we did also an analysis and found something pretty similar, which is that the survey respondents which have a higher level of integration between payables and T&E were also significantly more likely to report higher levels of policy compliance. So maybe that helps, and certainly naturally this is just for this respondent pool, but that might help organizations with a business case for the integration between payables and T&E.
All right, awesome, thank you. And so let's kind of jump back into some T&E automation. Let's look at the technology a little bit and give you some best practices. Again, these based on the survey respondents, but just interesting to see. Primary system, we still see a lot of people, at least in the small companies with spreadsheets. We still see what I say too much of ERP and Oracle. What I've seen in past surveys is that we saw some upward momentum in the mid-market size and dedicated solutions. And this is the ROI, which I told you about. So we had almost 75% a year or less. That's pretty good, right? A year or less ROI in your technology investment. I'll take that as a CFO. And then what about the benefits? What about the correlation, right? Did you deliver as promised? So this is a way, if you have a T&E expense solution, make sure you're holding your provider accountable. And so how do we manage the relationship after the transaction? And so if you look at the difference, so the top says why we invested, right? And then we actual benefits. So here, there's a 9% difference between what you were promised and what you got. As a client, I'm always going to get what I want. Hopefully you had even more benefits. And so again, this helps you make your business case. So if you haven't invested in that, these are some of the big reasons why people invest. Your expense report processing, simplifying it, right? Giving folks your time back, the approval process, again, diving into where bottlenecks are, your policy compliance. It serves your global travelers. That's the time they spend, the time your managers spend approving, timeliness of reports. We get the reports in so we can give our folks in Treasury that good cash forecast, our analytics, time spent, right? Reimbursing traveler faster, and systems integrability. So this is a slide that I would take a look at. Again, from what we've seen and what I've seen, again, only on the folks, but I'm pretty comfortable given the demographics of all that I've seen, that the business case is strong across industries, it's strong across company sizes. And then especially if companies understand all the benefits, not just reduction in expense report cost, but also the associated productivity costs in that as well. There's usually a strong business case, and also the business case becomes stronger. You want to be ready, right? As your company grows, you go across countries, you're getting into new businesses, you're doing acquisitions, you want to be ready for all that entails. And then the benefits, and again, here's another a little analysis where Rachel and her team wanted to look at the benefits of that, the relationship between a dedicated expense solution and the percentage of folks that comply with your T&E policy. And of course, it's good to see that the dedicated expense management helps you comply. I would hope that number would be higher. You have to may have to have soft dollar limits, but you should program this into your solution. Do that, right? So that's a benefit. You should get that compliance with your solution as well. And so some T&E best practices that we've seen between the results that we had, right, and a lower processing cost and compliance. So what are the things, right? Please rate the extent of implementation. And so what we see is T&E facilitates compliance with T&E policy. So you look at that to a great extent. So, you know, the folks that are on, basically at the end of the day, the folks that are on these slides are the ones that are going to have the biggest performance. What is this telling me? Technology matters, right? Technology fuels T&E leading practices, and there's a big ROI to it. So there's a lot of information on here, but basically all these things are functionality that you can get with a quality T&E expense management dedicated solution. And then potential T&E improvements. I like to ask these weird questions, 3 wishes. Again, this is another open-end text, but just interesting, right? You should, if you're not in charge of T&E, ask your team, right? Ask them if you had 3 wishes, what would it be? So look at the big one here, technology, right? Data, staff, managers, control, compliance. And so you'll see. So you want to know how to make someone really more productive? Ask them, right? So some key takeaways here for you from the survey results. More than half of respondents reported they won't return to their pre-pandemic T&E spend levels until next year, if ever. Just important for industries as well. Again, where you stand depends on where you sit. That's a big number. 2/3 believe that their business travelers will be comfortable with their travel by the end of this year. I think that number may be lower now. So that's a question that you want to ask your travelers. During more than pandemic, 80% investing in collaborative software subscription. Let's not go back to not having that, right? So let's empower everyone to collaborate in every environment. Almost half have incorporated new wellness procedures as well as flexible bookings. And so let's take a look at those companies, right, that were adding these things to their T&E policies and see where it makes sense for your companies. People have saved a lot of money in T&E spend for but customer related expenses, transportation and meals and grocery. But some of those things, it's not that we want to necessarily keep that. We have to look at the ROI of getting back to the other levels. And then the kind of the 44% don't track the costs for an expense report. And so at the end of the day, technology empowers T&E best practices. It is worth it. Your CFO's time, it's worth your time, it's worth your company's time to invest in effective T&E expense management. You want to make sure that you are mitigating the cost to process a report, and you want to make sure you get those productivity costs as well. You also want to make sure that you're estimating the ROI of that T&E spend as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and open things up for a few questions, but that was a lot of content to drive through.
That up. All right, thank you so much, Ernie. That was a great presentation, and as always, and it was a lot of content to get through, so kudos to you. Well, we want to open it up. We have a few minutes for Q&A, so as a reminder to folks, if you could use that Q&A box. And actually, we do have our first question there from Juan Carlos. Thank you. And not sure if you can see that, Ernie, but the question is, what in your view is the most important change, if you will, or revelation coming out of the survey?
I think for me, the revelation is that the ROI to T&E spend when measured is so high. And so, you know, I would expect that to be, they weren't realizing any ROI. And so we're seeing those numbers right off the charts, 100%, 200%, 500%. So to me, that was 1A was the number of folks that are still not quite comfortable traveling. So we need to be cognizant of companies not traveling, but also people not being comfortable quite yet.
Very good. Thanks, Ernie. And again, reminder, if you have any questions, pop those in there. I actually have one for you, Ernie.
Yeah.
And this is one that we get asked by a lot of our customers. So hopefully this won't take too much of the time questioning, but they want to know, what does a best practice process flow, look like ideally for T&E expense reimbursement processing? And we saw a lot of the characteristics, I think, in the the automation slide and the policy and such. But
Yeah.
any insights on that?
High level, you want to remove all the manual processes. You want them to be able to do it remotely. That's a big piece of it. You want to make sure your policy compliance is programmed in there as much as possible. You want to reduce the friction. And part of it is people have to have access to your T&E policy if they need it to make decisions on approval and the expenses. And so minimizing the number of people and systems involved in your process is going to be a win.
Absolutely. And so I just want to say, if you have any other questions, anybody on the webinar, feel free. We've got our contact information for you there at the end. So feel free to email either myself or Ernie directly, and we'd be more than happy to entertain those. So we do have a couple of additional resources or recommended resources for you here. Thank you there, Madison. And as a reminder, you'll receive a copy of the slides and the recording within the next couple of days. Also, if you would, please take our satisfaction survey when it's complete, because we really do take your responses and your feedback serious, and that helps us to produce webinars, hopefully, that are useful and helpful for our members. If you go to the next one there. And then finally, as I mentioned and promised, these are the additional related resources that we have on our website. So do take a look at those. Some of those were actually written because they were questions that we received from members and from customers. So with that, I would like to very much thank our guest speaker, Ernie Humphrey, and our subject matter expert. He provided great guidance and expertise from designing the survey and suggested analysis and now reporting the results. So thank you, Ernie, for that. You did a great job. And thanks to everybody for attending and participating with us today. And look forward to a white paper as well as a couple of follow-up articles that we're going to produce that we'll send out following this discussion, and we'll publish to hopefully help bring everybody up to that next level. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and look forward to talking to you again soon.